is seeing historic success in the Everglades.
As Fox 35's Carla Byron explains, it's helping to remove Burmese pythons from the wild in record numbers.
When Florida announced its ambitious decision to introduce hundreds of eastern indigo snakes into the wild to combat the invasive python crisis, the reaction was swift and merciless. Social media erupted with ridicule. Talk show hosts turned it into punchlines. News outlets ran sensationalized headlines comparing the plan to science fiction disasters. The public's collective response was simple. Florida had lost its mind. Fighting snakes with more snakes seemed like the epitome of governmental incompetence, a desperate measure born from panic rather than reason. Yet beneath all the mockery and disbelief lay a truth that would eventually silence the critics and transform public perception entirely. To understand why this decision sparked such widespread skepticism, we must first examine what led Florida to such an extraordinary place. The story doesn't begin with snakes at all. It begins with a catastrophe that nobody saw coming. A slow-motion disaster that unfolded so quietly that most people didn't even realize their state's ecosystem was collapsing until it was nearly too late. The Everglades, one of Earth's most unique and valuable environments, had been quietly dying for decades, and very few people noticed the warning signs. Decades before the current crisis, the Everglades represented something magical. Imagine vast expanses of sawgrass stretching endlessly toward the horizon, interrupted only by the glimmer of shallow water reflecting brilliant sunlight. Life flourished in every corner. Wading birds soared overhead in formations that darkened the sky. Raccoons bustled through the marshes, hunting for food. Bobcats moved silently through the brush, perfectly adapted hunters in perfect habitat. The entire ecosystem functioned like an intricate machine, where every creature played a vital role. Scientists valued this natural system at more than $30 billion annually in ecosystem services alone. It was a place where wilderness remained truly wild because nobody imagined such perfect balance could ever unravel. The beginning of the end came unexpectedly. In 1992, Hurricane Andrew tore through southern Florida with devastating force, destroying homes and communities in its path. Among the destruction was a reptile breeding facility near Miami. When the hurricane's winds died down and the damage was assessed, a few exotic snakes had escaped into the surrounding wetlands. Simultaneously, overwhelmed pet owners who had purchased Burmese pythons as cute baby serpents began releasing their massive adult snakes into the wild, believing they were setting them free to have better lives. Nobody took these initial incidents seriously. A few snakes here and there seemed insignificant compared to the massive environmental and social recovery needed after the hurricane. But nature operates on timescales that humans struggle to comprehend. What seemed harmless in the immediate aftermath proved catastrophic over the following decades. The escaped and released pythons began to breed. One breeding pair became dozens. Dozens became hundreds. By the early 2000s, wildlife experts realized they were facing an unprecedented crisis. The python population had exploded exponentially. Conservative estimates place the current population between 100,000 and 300,000 pythons, slithering through South Florida's swamps. Each female can lay nearly 100 eggs during breeding season. The snakes hide these eggs in undergrowth throughout the wetlands, and they multiply faster than any tracking system could possibly monitor. The ecological devastation followed swiftly and mercilessly. Raccoon populations, once common sights throughout the Everglades, declined by over 99%. Possums vanished at almost the same rate. Bobcats disappeared from vast regions where they had thrived for millennia. Marsh rabbits, animals that were always visible to any observer walking through the wetlands, nearly vanished entirely. Deer sightings plummeted by more than 90% in some areas. The pythons weren't just eating these animals, they were systematically erasing them from entire regions. The delicate food web that had supported countless species for thousands of years was unraveling thread by thread. What made the pythons such formidable invaders was their perfect adaptation to Florida's environment. The heat and humidity suited them completely. Food was abundant everywhere. Most critically, They had absolutely no natural predators in their new home. Their camouflage made them nearly invisible in the grass and undergrowth. Hunters and scientists could spend hours searching without finding a single snake. Each python removed by human effort seemed to be replaced by dozens more. It was indeed like trying to empty the ocean with a bucket. These weren't ordinary snakes either. Some grew over 20 feet long and weighed more than 200 pounds. Videos emerged showing pythons battling with alligators, creatures that had previously dominated Florida's food chain. The python had somehow claimed the apex predator throne, and nobody had any idea how to dethrone it. The economic and ecological stakes extended far beyond wildlife preservation. The Everglades ecosystem supported vast tourism industries, commercial fishing operations, and crucial flood control systems that protected millions of people living in southern Florida. Every year without action meant greater ecological damage and mounting economic losses. Hunters and professional trappers captured over 23,000 snakes over the course of several years. This sounds impressive until you realize it represents less than 1% of the estimated total population. The remaining pythons continued breeding, spreading northward into new territories, and expanding their range further into Florida's heartland. Desperation drove Florida officials to increasingly creative solutions. In 2013, they launched the Florida Python Challenge, inviting hundreds of people to participate in organized hunts. Warriors armed with traps, hooks, and determination waded through miles of swamp searching for snakes. By 2024, the event had become an annual spectacle, attracting nearly 900 participants from across the country and Canada. In 2025, the top hunter caught 60 pythons, a record, but the competition overall captured only a few hundred snakes. The effort was heroic, and the participants were celebrated as heroes fighting for Florida's ecological future. Yet the numbers revealed a grim truth. They weren't winning the battle. The state invested billions in technological solutions. Engineers designed robotic rabbits that mimic heat signatures and emitted realistic scent to trick pythons into attacking. Dog teams were trained to sniff out reptile scent trails. Drones hovered above the wetlands searching for movement. GPS collars were placed on raccoons and possums to track where predators were hunting. Some experiments involved fitting scout snakes with tiny radio transmitters to lead scientists to hidden breeding females. It was sophisticated, innovative, and ultimately insufficient. For every snake removed, the population continued to grow. By 2020, a troubling realization began to settle over the scientific community. Eradication wasn't just difficult, it was impossible. These predators had claimed the Everglades as their own. The best anyone could achieve was slowing their spread, managing populations, and limiting damage. This acceptance of defeat led to a radical reconceptualization of the problem. If you can't eliminate the invader, perhaps you can restore the native predators that once kept ecosystems in balance. This thinking led to the controversial decision that would spark international ridicule: reintroducing the eastern indigo snake. To understand why this was so revolutionary, you need to know what the eastern indigo snake represented. Once, the eastern indigo was the undisputed emperor of southeastern forests, growing to 9 feet or longer. These graceful snakes were utterly fearless predators. They didn't rely on venom, but that made them no less formidable. They ate anything that moved, including other snakes, whether venomous or not. They were immune to rattlesnake venom and displayed remarkable hunting prowess. Yet this emperor had been systematically destroyed. Habitat loss from logging and farming eliminated 97% of its native range. Collectors captured them for the pet trade. Hunters killed them during rattlesnake roundups. By the late 20th century, fewer than 50 breeding populations remained in the wild. When Florida announced plans to release hundreds of captive-bred indigo snakes into restored habitat, the reaction was instantaneous outrage. Wasn't Florida already overrun with snakes? Wouldn't adding more snakes make the situation worse? The public remembered the mongoose disaster in Hawaii, where an attempt to fix one problem created a much larger one. Critics flooded social media with jokes and memes. News outlets suggested the state had completely lost its credibility. Even some conservationists hesitated to defend the plan publicly because the optics were terrible. Florida had spent years killing snakes, and now it was releasing them? What the public didn't understand was that this plan had been decades in development. Quietly, behind the scenes, conservation organizations and wildlife agencies had been breeding eastern indigos in captivity for years. They had been restoring longleaf pine habitat. They had been protecting gopher tortoise burrows, which these snakes depended on for shelter and nesting. The timing of the public announcement may have seemed impulsive, but the actual project represented years of careful scientific planning and habitat restoration work. The ridicule faded when the indigos began proving themselves. In December 2023, researchers tracking a 13-foot python named Loki made a shocking discovery. The massive snake had been killed by a 25-pound bobcat. This was unprecedented. Nobody thought native predators could successfully hunt adult pythons. But the Everglades were beginning to fight back. Alligators started consuming smaller pythons. Eastern indigo snakes, released by conservation programs, were documented eating juvenile pythons. Even the elusive Florida panther was photographed taking on invasive snakes. Native species were learning that these newcomers could actually be prey. The real miracle came later. In 2023, trail cameras at the Apalachicola Bluffs and ravines preserve captured wild-born eastern indigo hatchlings. These weren't captive-bred snakes. These weren't tagged or monitored by humans. These were baby snakes born to previously released indigos in the wild. For the first time in nearly 50 years, the eastern indigo snake had reproduced naturally in North Florida. The project wasn't just keeping the species alive, it was enabling it to thrive independently. As 2024 became 2025, the recovery accelerated. Scientists spotted more indigos across restored areas. A strong 6-foot male moved confidently through scrub habitat. 19 others from earlier release years were identified across multiple counties. A female from the 2019 release was still actively hunting and thriving. Across the border in Alabama, similar reintroduction projects released 44 more snakes in 2025, adding to over 500 indigos now returned to their native range. The indigos can't eliminate the python problem completely. No single species can solve such a massive ecological crisis. But they can change the balance. They eat young pythons. They compete for food and habitat. They reclaim parts of the ecosystem that had been thrown into chaos. Combined with professional hunters, public participation programs, and habitat restoration, the indigos are part of a comprehensive solution that's actually working. What stunned the world wasn't that the eastern indigo could hunt pythons. It was that a restoration effort built on patience, science, and trust in nature actually succeeded. For decades, people believed Florida's wild places were beyond repair, too damaged to ever recover from human mistakes. The idea of releasing more snakes into an area already overrun with invasive snakes seemed ridiculous. Yet what appeared to be madness became one of the most inspiring conservation success stories of recent history. The irony is profound. People mocked the decision to release indigos while cheering on python bounty hunters, never realizing both sides were fighting for the same goal. The hunters focused on control, while scientists focused on restoration. Together, they began healing a system that had fallen apart. Florida demonstrated something crucial. You can't fix complex ecological problems with simple solutions. You must rebuild the system piece by piece until it can heal itself. The eastern indigo, once an emperor of the forest reduced to near extinction, is proving it can still reclaim its throne and restore balance to a landscape pushed to the brink of ecological collapse. Like, subscribe, and follow for more.